indwelt with the Spirit of the Most High God are the light of the world. Go ahead and be seated. I forgot. I'm sorry. Is that a candle can be blown out. But burning embers of coal, when pressure and wind hits them, they ignite with flames. And it merely heats up, become more intense. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Listen to me, church. We were never intended to be hidden in this building. You were never intended as the people of God to be hidden from the lost world around you. Oh, it's real easy to be Christian in here because you're loved in here. You're supported. You're encouraged. You're embraced. But in a dark world, you're desperately needed. He goes on to say, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. What does a light do? It brings illumination or light to all who are in the house. Then he gives a command. This is not a suggestion. He says, let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. The purpose of your light shining is for the glory of the Father. It's not comfortable being light right now. But I want to tell you this, that America is still the safest place to live as the light. A considerable amount of the world is under intense persecution for being a Christian. Every week I get some information, emails or texts from some reminding us to keep praying for and interceding for the church abroad. Certainly those in the Middle East and throughout Europe and much of the islands, they're under intense persecution, being killed solely because they are Christian. And we're seeing it increase here in the homeland. You are the light of the world. Ms. Reed, if you go ahead and get that video ready for me. There's a portion I want to remind you of. That here in the homeland, we're fighting a battle also. And it's a battle between light and darkness. In fact, while you're still there, turn to St. John 3 and 19. St. John 3. I think this is where I want to go. Help me, Lord. He says in verse 19, and this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world. Who is this? Jesus Christ. He's come into the world. He is the light. And in his absence, who's the light? We are. He's come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light. Why? Because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. Now, what I want you to look at is, I want you to look at this, and I'm going to make a comment or two after this. This is the darkness that's being attempting to spread across this entire nation. Nearly every metropolitan city in America has been confronted by this demon spirit of darkness, and it's here in Charlotte, and they're positioned to vote on this to transform Charlotte as of tomorrow, if this thing passes. Just let this is coming
Steve
out of,
owns a gym in Anchorage. But if Proposition 5 passes, Steve will be forced to open the women's locker room to anyone who claims a female identity. If Steve says yes, he'll lose customers. And if he says no, he can be fined or imprisoned. Anchorage is already a tolerant city. Vote no on Proposition 5. This message paid for by Protect Your Rights. Vote no on Prop 5. Top donors are Protect Your Freedom, No on 5, Josh Pepper, and Chapel by the Sea.
The next one, please.
Houston's Proposition 1 bathroom ordinance. What does it mean to you? Any man at any time could enter a woman's bathroom simply by claiming to be a woman that day. No one is exempt. Even registered sex offenders could follow women or young girls into the bathroom, and if a business tried to stop them, they'd be fined.
This same bill that Alaska faced, Houston, Texas defeated by referendum, is the same one we're faced with tomorrow at the city council meeting. We've met on the 1st of February, we met on the 8th of February, and now we're meeting tomorrow night and at the Government Plaza at 5 p.m. for a rally requiring and asking our city council not to approve this ordinance. This is unimaginable. This is the kind of darkness that is spreading across this nation. Many cities are being faced with it. Many have defeated it. We defeated this by the grace of God in 2015, in March of 2015. If you remember, we dealt with the same one. They tried to pass it, but by the miraculous hand of God, they voted it down. Now, let me tell you what happened. And this is why I'm so adamant and slightly pushed out of character. You've got to understand that all of these things are connected. What I've been saying for years about the church being light and being salt, being engaging and being involved in the political and social fibers of our city, I keep saying it. Now, you ones here, you've done well, I'm sure. I'm sure you've been listening to me. But the vast majority of the church community are totally, they're not, okay, be nice. The church community is failing to be light. I did good. Did I not do good? Okay. You heard me say before the election in November, this past November, the importance of being representatives of Jesus Christ, that we would be salt and light in the public arena. I keep saying over and over again, it's important that the church engages every arena of authority, that we take it back. Let me tell you what happened. In November, this past November, we had a county citywide election. And the city of Charlotte voted in a new mayor. I mentioned to you, trying to be nice, that this same mayor that was recently voted in was supporting this ordinance in 2015. And I kept saying, listen, you got to pay attention, okay? Well, it came to light that this mayor was supported by the LBGT community and helped to get into office to support this ordinance. And I think no less than 2 other city council members also were aided and assisted into the election to support this ordinance. Now, here's what's frustrating. I heard this the other day. I heard this Friday. That in the last election, November, only 8% of the evangelical Christian community showed up to vote. Charlotte is said to have more churches per capita than any place in the nation. And 8% of the evangelical Christian community showed up to vote. So we got what we deserved. And now we're trying to hold on to some sense of decency in our city as we fight this ordinance. 8% of the evangelical community. Only 15% of eligible voters showed up in November. 15% of eligible voters in Charlotte-Mecklenburg showed up to vote. I'm not going to ask in here how many of you showed up to vote. In 2014, nationally, Only 36% of all of eligible voters showed up to vote in 2014. What percentage was Christian? I heard this number also recently. Supposedly there are 90 million evangelical Christians in America. 90 million evangelical Christians in America. But on an average, only about 30 million ever shows up to vote or play any part in deciding the direction of a nation. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any and all people. That comes from Proverbs 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation. You know, I mentioned to you recently that I was really positioned and poised to see some really bad things to happen in America. I was ready. I'm like, oh Lord, here it comes. November came, I didn't see it. December came, I didn't see it. Okay, and I said, Lord, where did we miss it? I thought this was going to happen, that was going to happen. And the Lord assured me it was his mercy. It wasn't us. Now, we did pray, and we sought him, and he assured us because of our diligence and prayer, God heard our cry, and he was merciful. I want you to do your homework on this kind of hellish, unimaginable kind of policies being perpetrated across the nation. Personally, I don't think anything is more common sense than just your gender. Now, if you're confused, we're going to work with you. But you should not be passing laws to accommodate the confused. But when only 8% of the church shows up to vote to determine leadership, we get what we ask for. Righteousness exalts a nation. America is great. America will continue to be great because the righteous redeemed does what God tells them to do. Look, here's an important statement. I heard this, it came to my mind, and when I thought about this morning, immediately the name came up. Edmund Burke, one of the founding leaders of this great land, said, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And we're living in a time when the church as a whole, not this group, is doing absolutely nothing. And if you don't believe you can lose your freedoms and liberties, look at what's happening throughout the rest of the world. At a meeting again on Friday, someone said, he was involved very closely in some of the missionary work. He said that one of his African brothers said, if America goes, there goes the rest of the world. Most of the world knows that America is the last stance for freedom, liberty, and righteousness. Now, what's frustrating is many of us who've always had what we think we have often take it for granted. I'd like to challenge some of you to travel beyond your own borders and find out what freedom really is like and how precious and yet how fragile it really is. And what's interesting is much of the freedoms that we have comes because we have a stable government, generally speaking. A stable government. Most of the world, the reason why they're in chaos is because their government has failed to work effectively. And we have the longest lasting constitution in any history. A communist is leading in some polls. You do understand that socialism and communism are the same. The rights are given to the government, not to the people. We need to understand that this republic gives you the right. It doesn't give the government right. And the government's sole purpose is to protect your rights. Under socialism and communism, government has the rights and you serve the government. Do you like that idea? We're living in some very trying times. One of the number one threats to the American liberty and freedoms is the growth of radical Islam. I was going to bring this picture that this brother gave me this week, and when I saw it, it traumatized my soul because I know what it means. It's a picture of Muslims bowing to the Capitol, praying to their deity for the control of America. And it's this huge crowd of people, and you see the Capitol, U.S. Capitol in the backdrop. They're determined to take over America while we sleep. And while we keep complaining about comfort, they're looking for control of the nation. And they've been successful throughout Europe. They've been successful in cities and states already in the U.S., Michigan being one of those states that they have absolutely seized. There's a city in Texas, supposedly, that's already under Sharia law. You understand Sharia law is that the Constitution is pushed aside for the sake of the religious beliefs of the Muslim left. And we just have church. We're going to be having a gathering of some of us were talking about it this past week, and I'm going to say this, so I'm so far out of my comfort zone. I don't really care what most people think anyway, so I'm just. I'm especially challenged with the black church. And I use the term black church for the sake of the discussion because the average church of color will not even talk about these issues. They wouldn't even dare show that video. Why? Because it might offend someone in the music ministry. No disrespect. She knows, she and I can converse. In many of the churches of color, the musicians and the praise team got more twitch in their walk than the women of God. And some of these churches won't even talk about it. What do you think happens to the anointing when there is that kind of perversion being brought forth? You've heard me say this. The day I stop standing on this, please replace me. In fact, the elders and the board of directors, please, if I miss it, quickly get me out of here. How dare anyone to preach anything but the scriptures? I don't care how many people mount up and say something is now right. God is always, his word must stand. We must be preaching the gospel, and it doesn't matter. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the government plaza to stand as one people saying this is not acceptable. Now, this fight's not going to end tomorrow. I'm sorry. It'll never stop until righteousness prevails, and we must stand. Never accept an unlawful law, no matter who passes it. It's unlawful, and we must stand. And we must be calling our legislators. If this thing passes tomorrow, I'm going to make sure that you have all the information you need. You call your state legislator and says, I'm sorry, I demand Charlotte reverse this decision. We call the governor's office, and we'll show up down there in the legislators, and we begin to demand, you must overturn this unlawful act by the city council. We're not going to stop. How many children must be made of own? See, what's interesting, this is not just a Charlotte issue. This is going to impact your schools, your children, everything about your children. Your schools will then be affected because there's no limit. The church itself is affected by this because there are no limits. They didn't put a religious exclusion in this ordinance. They didn't put an exclusion for public schools. All right, I'm going to move forward just for a moment. It's important that we be informed and enlightened. Look with me, if you would, please. Look at 1 Chronicles 12 and 32. Are you still with me this morning? One of the things I want to encourage you is that you don't hide your light. It wasn't intended to be hidden. It's intended to shine. So wherever you go, in the schools, in the workplace, the market,